When it comes to hacking, knowledge is power, and there are all kinds of tools that let you gain more knowledge. And the more you know about your target system or target computer, the more options you have available. So for example, on a computer, you might have a web server running, a shell server, or maybe a screen sharing service, RDP. So the more you know about which services are running, the more likely you are able to hack into the system. There are many tools for hacking or penetration testing, or sometimes it's called pen testing. So, and many of those tools work in the terminal. So if we open a terminal window, we'll start with the first tool, which is called nmap. And what nmap does is it scans your target computer and shows you which services are running. Now that's very useful because, for example, there might be more than a web service running. Maybe there's a screen sharing service and you want to brute force into that screen sharing service. But that only makes sense if that service is opened. So nmap is a command line tool, and it lets you scan computer addresses, so IP addresses and websites, and it returns which services are running. So nmap is installed by default on Kali Linux. If you're using another system like another Linux version or Windows, then you can install it with the package manager. And nmap is a command line tool in which you use switches or flags to scan. So you'll see all kinds of flags here. And if you scroll up, you'll see all kinds of flags can be specified. So the most basic way to scan something is just to type nmap and then the internet address or the computer address. So I'll type this computer address and just press enter. And what it does is it will connect to that computer and tell you which services are running. And that's useful for hacking because, for example, if there is no web server running, you can't hack into it. But if there is, you can hack into it. So I scanned this address, this web address, and you'll see this computer is running a web service on port 80. It's running a web service on port a shell service on port 22 and some other services. So which services are running will depend completely on which website or service is running. You can specify which port to scan. For example, if you only want to scan one port, you can specify -p and then the port you want to scan. For example, port 80. And you'll see in this case port 80 is open on this computer. Or you can specify whichever specific port. So for example, port 22. And you'll see it's running a shell service. So -p will let you specify a specific port. Now you can also scan a port range. So for example, from port 1 to 100, see if any open ports. And this will scan from port 1 to 100. And you'll see it discovered that many more services are running. So it's very useful to specify the -p flag. You might discover services that are running that won't show in the default run. So without the flag, it shows fewer ports because it just scans some of the major ones. So you'll see when it completes this port scan, it doesn't show as many ports. But if you specify the port range, you can discover many more ports that are open and that you can connect to. Now, if you want to scan all open ports, you can type nmap, whatever IP address, computer address, or website, and type -p-, and that will scan all open ports on the target system. And in this case, this is the computer, my local computer, so there are no open ports because this is the default Kali Linux distribution, default system, which doesn't have any services running. But the -p or the -p- flag will scan for all open ports on the target. In the last video, you learned about nmap. nmap lets you investigate a target and see which services are running. So it can run a database, it can run screen sharing, it can run all kinds of different services, right? It can run SSH, many different services. So we just typed nmap with the target, and it would show which services are running. So in this case, we have an SSH server running and a web service, but this will depend, of course, on the target system. The next thing you can try to do is to connect to any of these services. For example, we can try to connect to the SSH service which is running. So you'll see the IP address here is the same as my target, and it will ask for a password. So what we can do is use a password cracking tool, which goes through a list of thousands of passwords and try every password in that list. A process called brute forcing. Now, Kali Linux by default comes with a tool called Hydra. If you're using another system, you can install Hydra manually. So Hydra is a password cracking tool that tries every password automatically from a list of passwords. So in this case, the list of passwords, you always need to have that on your computer. Of course, on the internet, you can find many different lists of passwords, and Hydra will just try all those passwords automatically on your target computer. Now, Hydra supports many different protocols, so you'll see here we have SSH and a web service, but there's so many more, like a file sharing protocol, FTP. There's databases like MySQL or MariaDB or MongoDB. It supports screen sharing services, so RDP, TeamSpeak, or others. So really, there's like a wide range of protocols that are supported. If you just press Hydra Enter, it will tell you a list of many different supported services that it can try to crack automatically. So it's important that the password is, of course, on in the password list. And the larger your password list, the more likely that the password is inside it. Now, on the internet, you can find many different passwords lists that you can download and try it out on yourself. So how does this work? First, you need to type Hydra. Well, first let's see the nmap result, which services are open. So these are the services we can try to brute force. And in the case of the web service, it just shows a website, so we cannot really do anything with it. But the SSH service asks for a username and password, and so we can try to brute force the password. Now, when we connected, it already shows the username. So the username is Kali. We just need to know the password. So we can type Hydra -l Kali -p with your password list. Then the target IP address and the protocol. In this case, the protocol was SSH. Now, the password list doesn't exist by default, right? You need to either download your password list from the internet. And in Kali Linux, there's also a password list stored in user share word lists. So that's user share word lists. The file is called rocku.txt, so you can copy that to your home directory. You see I already did that. Right click and extract here. It will extract the password list, rocku.txt. And rocku.txt is just a huge password list, so I'm not going to click on it because you'll see this is a really huge list of passwords of 100 megabytes, or 133. But I can just show you the part of that list. So let's show the first 25 lines of that list, and you'll see it has many passwords, and the list is huge. So this list has 14 million passwords in it that have been used in the past by people. So it will try all of those lists automatically with Hydra. So let me specify the list and just press enter. Now keep in mind this is capital P -p, and this is lowercase -l for the username. Now if I press enter, it will try all the passwords in the list, and you'll see it found the password. So in this case, the password is rocku, and the username is login. So let's try that out. We connect, and it found the password rocku, and we're inside the computer. So we just hacked into the computer. Now let me exit this. So all we did was scan for open ports. We found the open ports, and then on the target, brute force using Hydra to try all possible passwords in rocku.txt. Now on the internet, you can of course download many different password lists with the username. Now in this case, the username was shown, but sometimes you don't know the username, so you have to guess the username or try to find in some other way what is the username. And the target IP address and the SSH. Now one thing to note is that on Linux computers, there's always a root user, and root is the system administrator. So let's try to crack that, see if it can find that. So the root user always exists. So we can try to brute force that as well. Now, depending on where the password is in the list, of course, it can take a long time to crack the password. Welcome to Burp Suite Basics. In this video, we'll cover what the Burp Suite is and how to install it if you need to, and also basic navigation and configuring of the Burp Suite. So first, what is the Burp Suite? The Burp Suite is a graphical program, GUI program that's written in Java. So you need Java installed to use it. And it's a tool you can use for web application hacking. If you use Kali Linux, it's installed by default. So if I go to the top here, if I go to the top here and type Burp Suite, you'll see Burp Suite is installed by default. But if you don't use Kali Linux, you can also download it online. So if I search for Burp Suite, and load the page, you'll see the first result where we can download the Burp Suite tool and install it manually. So we find out there's several editions. So there's an enterprise edition, but there's also a community edition, which is free. And you can download it. But if you use Kali Linux, then the Burp Suite is already installed, and as well as many other hacking tools, right? So the Kali Linux is a Linux distribution that you can run from a live USB or live CD, and it has many different hacking tools. So I really recommend to use Kali Linux, because you don't have to install any tools. They're already installed, and you can just use them. So let's start the Burp Suite. It looks like this. So unlike the previous tools, which were command line only, this is a graphical tool. And let's start it. So it takes a moment to start. And you'll see this is what it looks like. So we have several tabs and several screens here. You can click through the tabs. So these tabs you can use for web application hacking. Now there are several ways to navigate around this GUI. One is using these tabs here, but you can also use the file menu. So you'll see there's also options here which map. So for example, intruder here maps to this intruder. Repeater, of course, maps to repeater. So you can also use this top bar here, but I recommend just using the tabs because that's quite easy. You can also use shortcuts like Ctrl-Shift-T, Ctrl-Shift-D, Ctrl-Shift-P, Ctrl-Shift-I, and Ctrl-Shift-R. So those are just the first letter of those tabs, right? So Ctrl-Shift, whichever. So let's do Ctrl-Shift-S, Ctrl-Shift-D, Ctrl-Shift-T, Ctrl-Shift-P, Ctrl-Shift-I, Ctrl-Shift-R. So that allows you to navigate quicker around the dashboard. So one of the fundamentals of the Burp Suite is to intercept and manipulate web traffic. So if I start the Burp Suite, you'll see it's starting, and we'll go to the proxy tab once it's started. So you can just click on proxy or Ctrl-Shift-P. It will go to the proxy tab. You'll see a button intercept on. You can click on off and just open a browser and visit any web page. So whichever web page you want to open. Doesn't really matter, right? So, sorry. You can open any, basically you can just surf around. It's a web browser, right? So one thing you can do with the Burp Suite in the proxy tab is to intercept traffic. So let's type a search query here. For example, hello. Click on intercept, click on intercept is off. So it will turn intercept on. And now it will capture all of the network traffic between the browser and the website. So if I click on search here, you'll see it captured the first request, and another request here, which is our search query, right? This is our search query, and also some information, which web browser we're using and other data. Now, of course, we can just forward this, but we can also send this to the repeater. So right click somewhere on this text and click on send to repeater. So that's right click, send to repeater. You'll see the repeater highlight up. And now let's just click forward and click intercept is off. So now we have the request here, and we can manipulate it or just send it. So if I click send, you'll see the same data show up, and we can manipulate the query here. So let's say we search for something else, and you'll see it did that request. Now, of course, this is just raw data. So of course, this is the website result, but it's a bit hard to see. So what you can do is right click, request in browser, in the current session browser, copy this URL and just paste it. And you'll see it shows the output. So you can use the Burp Suite to intercept traffic and to manipulate it. In this case, we manipulated the query, but of course you can do this for all kinds of things inside web apps as well. So it's important that if you do this in the proxy, the intercept is on in the moment you start to capture the traffic, and then send it to repeater to manipulate it. So besides just repeating requests, the Burp Suite can also be used to brute force passwords in web applications. So let's start Burp Suite. And then from the Burp Suite, we will open a web browser. So click on proxy, and we'll click on intercept is off, because we first will start the browser and browse around. So you can see it's just a web browser. Make sure to click intercept is off and then click open web browser. And we'll search for a shop called OWASP Juice Shop, which is an app you can use for testing website security. So that's the OWASP Juice Shop, which is just a shop basically. So it's just an example shop with many different products, and it comes with a login page. Obviously, you can click on products and find reviews. Now, when we click on, there's several languages, there's a search option. So this is just a basic shop, right? And any shop always has a login field. So in this case, we have a login and we need an email and a password. So sometimes you can just find the email address in the website itself. And sometimes you'll need to do some tricks to find the emails, or just try to some other way to find the emails. Or maybe you know an email of the shop owner. So we click on any product and click on reviews. You'll find a lot of email addresses here, which we'll use to log in. So we want the admin address, obviously. Click on login. So that's another thing, like with a shop, you can always try to use admin or administrator or some email addresses like that. Because even every shop website usually has some emails as well. So you can try to guess it, and also just to try to find it on the website itself. Now, we don't know the passwords, but we'll use Burp Suite for that. So we'll click on intercept is on, and it will now intercept traffic between the web browser and the web app. So just type something and click login. Click forward. You'll see there's no password here, so forward this. Again, forward, and now we have a request which has the username and password we just typed. You'll see it doesn't show any reply yet because we didn't forward it yet. So we'll forward this to intruder. So right click, send to intruder. Again, right click, send to intruder. You'll see intruder light up with the request. And then we'll click forward, and intercept is on, so it should be off again. So this was not the correct password. Now we can go to intruder. Click positions, and then click clear. Now for this field, we'll click the add with the symbol, the marker. So it should be like this. So first clear everything, and then around the password, click the add symbol. Now click on payloads, and we'll want to do a simple list attack, password list attack. Click on load, and what we'll do is load a list of passwords. So you can find one of these lists in user share word lists, for example DRB. You'll need a password list, so in Kali Linux many password lists are included by default. If that's not the case, you can find password lists online. So click on a small list just for testing. You'll see many different passwords. And finally we'll click Start Attack. And it will start trying all those passwords automatically. So you'll see here password 1 it tried, 1, 2, 3. And it just goes through the list of all those passwords. So it's not the fastest tool for brute forcing, but it works. So if you just keep it running, you'll see it will try 959 passwords. And obviously when the password is correct, the status will change. So you can sort by status. And you'll see for now the password has not been found yet. But obviously if the password is in the list, it will eventually return a different status, and you can sort by status and then see that the password is correct, so then you know the password. Now this can take a while. Sometimes it might not work if the password is not in the password list, so you should try it with different passwords. John the Ripper is one of the most well-known hash cracking tools. It has fast cracking speed, and it can crack all kind of hashes. So John the Ripper is a command line tool. So if I start the command line, I can type John, and you'll see John the Ripper is installed. So on Kali Linux, it's installed by default. If you, for some reason, use another system, you can download it from this website. So what are hashes? Passwords are always stored as hashes. They are not, most of the times, I'd say. So a hash is a way to store data that is hard to reverse. For example, if I show you the passwords file in Linux, so passwords are stored in etc shadow, you'll see that the passwords are not stored in plain text. They are stored as a hash. So the password for Kali here, the user Kali, is this cryptic text. The same with the user Alice. They have a cryptic text. That's how the passwords are stored. So that's what hashes are. Now hashes are created using a hashing algorithm. And there are many different hashing algorithms, such as MD4, MD5, SSH1. On Windows they always use NTLM as hashing algorithm. So these are all the hashing algorithms that are used to create hashes. So what happens is that you have your input text that goes into the algorithm, and then you have your hash. And from the hash, it is basically impossible to get back to the text. So it's a one-way algorithm. And the way to create hashes, you can just do it in the terminal. For example, I can type echo hello, or sorry, echo -n hello, and then type MD5 sum. So that will create the hash for the text hello. A small change in the input will create a small change, a big change in the output. So for example, if I make a capital H, you'll see it's totally different. The hashes are totally different. So a small change in the input will create a huge change in the output. And that's also a reason why it's hard for, given a hash, it's really hard to, or basically impossible to go back to the text. So if you have something like this, and you try to reverse the algorithm, so you have the hash output and you just want the password again, it's basically impossible to go this direction. So more about hashing. You can hash any word or any data. So whatever data you want. You can also do this online if you don't want to use the command line. So if I go to duck.com and I type MD5 ABCD, it will give you the same hash as in the terminal. So you'll see they match. So you can also do the hashing in online if you want to. For example, I can type example. You'll get this hash for MD5, which corresponds to this one. So it's exactly the same. As I mentioned, there are different hashing algorithms. So these are just some of the known ones. So for example, we can try SSH1. We'll create the SSH1 hash for the SSH1 algorithm. The Windows hash, so let's see if that works. So the Windows hashing doesn't work online. There's probably some websites that do. And of course you can do other hashes, for example MD4, it's an older version. So that's how hashes are created and how hashes work. So usually passwords are stored in the hash format and not in the text format. Now some companies, they do store the passwords in a text format, so anybody who has access to the file can read the data. But of course if you have the hash, or if an attacker has the hash, he doesn't immediately know what the passwords are. So as I mentioned, the algorithm itself is not reversible. You cannot go from the hash back to the text. But it doesn't mean that you cannot crack passwords. So if you have a list of hashes like the one in etc shadow, sorry, let me output that. So a list of hashes, in this case there's 2 hashes. That doesn't mean that we cannot get back to those passwords. It's just we cannot use the algorithm, we cannot reverse the algorithm. However, what we can do is have a huge password file and create the hashes for all of them, and then see if any of those hashes matches the hashes in our password file. So just using the same pathway, but then creating like a database of hashes that correspond to passwords, and using that database called a rainbow table, we try to find the corresponding hash. So for example, we can create a database. If we, let's say we have MD5 rainbow table, so let's say you can create a database just going through a list of passwords, right? So you can go through many common passwords, and then you have a database of text matching with the hash, text matching with the hash, text matching with the hash, text matching with the hash. And then if you have a password file, you can just search through your file if any of those hashes match in your password. So of course the Linux system is not using the MD5 hashing algorithm, that's why they look totally different. MD5 is like an older hashing system, but that's the principal way. So what if you cannot reverse this algorithm and you want to go back to the passwords? That's where John comes in. So John is a hash cracking tool. If you have a password list, it will automatically create hashes and then try to find a matching hash for the hash you want to crack. So it has a large number of words as input, and that number of words sometimes called a dictionary. So you can find many password lists online. On Kali Linux there's also a password list included in user share user share word lists. You can find some word lists, for example rock.txt, which you can copy to your home directory or wherever you want. So you can copy it to your home directory and right click to extract it. And then you'll have the password list. You'll see it's 133 gigabytes. So this is like a password list of 40 million passwords. If I show you that just part of that list, you'll see that the first 10 are passwords. I can show you the first 100 if you want to, but the size of that file is 40 million passwords. So it's quite a huge password list. And then for every password in that list, it creates the hash and then tries to find if the hash matches the hash in the list. So let's do an example with John where we crack the passwords that are stored in etc shadow. So on Linux you have 2 files, etc password, which has just the usernames and some general information, and you have etc shadow. And etc shadow has the hashed version of the password for all of the users. So in this case there's 2 users and 2 hashes, and we'll use John the Ripper to crack those hashes. So let's crack those hashes. First we'll need both files. So we'll need etc password, which will store as password.txt, and we'll need etc shadow, which will store as shadow.txt. Now sometimes you need root access to have access to both of the files, but for hash cracking that doesn't matter. So now we have both files. We have the password file and we have the shadow file. So we copied both of them with these commands. So that copies both of them to files in your home directory. Then we need to unshadow it. So unshadow is to combine the two files. So unshadow password.txt and shadow.txt and save it into a file called hash2crack.txt. Then the next step is to use John. So John will go through our word list, so whichever word list you specify, and then crack them. So we'll type John -- word list rock.txt and your file you just created. Now it's important that all of those files are in the same directory. So if I go to the file explorer, you'll see I have rock.txt here, password.txt, and shadow.txt. So all of them need to be in the same directory, otherwise John can't find the files. So if I press enter, you'll see it had already cracked the hashes, no hashes left to crack. And then I can show the output by typing John with the file name and then -- show. And then you'll see the usernames and the passwords. So now we crack the hashes and we know the username passwords for this system. So that's how you can crack hashes for a Linux system. On Windows, passwords are also stored as hashes. But if you have access to a Windows computer, you can all those hashes, just like you could in Linux. So if I were to type cat etc shadow, it dumps all the hashes to the screen of the users. So in Windows, you can do the same. And you can find all the hashes on Windows using a tool called mimikatz. And then run this command to all the hashes. And so if I scroll down, you'll see this is the command to type inside mimikatz. And it will all the hashes, so all the passwords for the different users. So you'll see user, password, user, password, user, password. And all of the passwords are stored as hashes. Now on Windows computers or on Windows hashes, these NT-LM hashes can also be cracked. So NT is refers to the Windows NT products, so which originally meant new technology. So basically all the modern Windows systems use the NT-LM hashes. And we can use John the Ripper to crack those hashes as well. So I have a file with some hashes. So Windows.txt, you'll see the length of those hashes is the same. So these are some Windows passwords. And we can crack those using John the Ripper. So in order to crack, we'll type John -- format is NT -- rules. W is your password list. So make sure the password list is in the same directory. And then the file containing those hashes. So you'll see it cracked the hashes for those users. In this case, just in a matter of seconds. So now we have those passwords for the Windows users for these hashes. So now we can log in as those users because we have the passwords. So that's how quickly you can sometimes crack hashes. Of course, you need to have a good password list. So rock.txt has 40 million passwords. So it's probable that the passwords are in there, but you can find even larger password lists online and crack those hashes. Now, another tool you can use is CrackStation. So if you go to crackstation.net and any of those hashes in there, it will also crack the hash for you. So you'll see the hash and the password. So crackstation.net is an alternative to using the command line. So let me paste it here and run it, and you'll see the plain text password. So cracking Windows hashes is basically the same as, or very similar as cracking Linux hashes. Just to extract those in a Windows computer, you'll need to use a tool called mimikatz. And inside mimikatz, type this command, which will have all the passwords. So let me just enlarge it a bit. So that's this command, which will have all the passwords. So then you'll have all the hashes, so the username with the hashes, and you can crack those hashes either using CrackStation or using John the Ripper. So let me just give you an example again. So let's take this hash and we'll take it into CrackStation, paste it and run it. And you'll see the password here is never. And you can do that for any hash, right? So that's one of those captchas. So if you don't like captchas, I recommend just using the command line, because then you don't have to do those captchas. So let's say we copy some of these hashes that Mimikatz dumped. And we'll paste them. So those are the hashes that came out of Mimikatz. So the passwords, the NTLM hashes. And we'll use John the Ripper to crack those. And you see we already got 3 passwords just on the moment of running it. And like the other passwords, it might take a bit longer, of course, if you run it on your own computer. So crackstation.net has the advantage that it's very fast. But on John the Ripper, you have the advantage that you don't have to type in any captchas. So that's how you can crack hashes for Windows computers.